Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about the new patch that we just got for Guilty Gear Strive. This was a emergency patch that Arxis just did, kind of in response to people complaining about the state of Season 4. For those unaware, people were pretty unhappy of how the game changed in Season 4. It wasn't very well balanced, there was a lot of bugs, there's just a lot of issues with Season 4's release, and they decided to do essentially an emergency patch. It's kind of the first time I've ever seen Arxis do something like this before. So today I want to talk about my critical review of how this patch went, because yeah, I'm someone who also didn't really like how Season 4 shook out, even though my character benefited technically. I had a lot of issues with Season 4, and I was really happy to see them, kind of do this emergency patch. It felt like they were really listening to the community's feedback, but the question is, did they actually listen to the community's feedback? And that's what I want to review today. I want to know what you guys think about this patch down in the comments below. How do you guys feel about things so far? Do you like the direction things went in? Do you like the changes the characters got? How are you feeling about things? Let me know before you watch the video and we can see how things kind of line up. And while you're down there, consider dropping a like and subbing to the channel. Likes and comments really help the YouTube algorithm. So if you ever want to help me out, that's like one of the best ways to do it for sure. And also make sure you're subscribed because you're not going to want to miss out on my future video. With that said, let's get into this review. And I have a lot of criticisms. And just keep in mind, even though I'm being critical of the game, I do still like the game a lot, but I think being critical is really important. And let's try to be constructive about it as well. So for starters, I thought Season 4 had some neat ideas. And I think the biggest problem with Season 4, as I talked about in previous videos, was more so the execution of the things that they did. For example, they wanted to lower damage and have the game, kind of have more interactions in total in a single match. And I think that idea was good. There's a lot of good things on paper about Season 4, but they just didn't actually hit the mark. I'll say it was kind of impressive how off the mark they were, but I'll give them credit for at least having good direction. And this patch kind of was looking to follow up more on those ideas that they had already set with Season 4. They wanted to lower damage, they wanted more interactions. And also specifically, they wanted characters to have more defined strengths and weaknesses. All great things on paper. And it was cool to hear that Arxis was already going to be immediately following up with another patch to kind of double down on these ideas that they wanted to set with Season 4. I thought that was good. However, we are once again in a scenario where I don't think they actually hit the mark almost at all. So there are damage nerfs, and I think the damage nerfs are actually pretty good. I think most characters got at least one significant nerf to their damage somewhere. Either nerfing one move that they use frequently or nerfing a lot of moves that they, use periodically. In some way or another, they have nerfed a lot of the character's damage in a somewhat considerable way. That's good. The other thing that they also talked about in the patch notes is they talked about wanting certain characters to be able to shine a little bit better. So they did buff some of the weaker characters. So characters like Milia, Axel, those characters got a couple of things to kind of help them out a little bit. Nothing crazy, but they were small little changes, and I actually appreciate that. I think Guilty Gear would be really well served if they did more patches like this, where they just made little small adjustments to characters to try to keep them in line with some things a little bit better. So I think that was good as well. However, that's pretty much where the positives end. So let me explain some of the other issues I have with this patch. And I'm going to go about this just off the top of my head. I'm not going in any particular order. So first of all, nerfing damage I think is actually a really good thing, like I mentioned. However, nerfing damage disproportionately affects some characters more than others. Naturally, that's just how changes go in fighting games. If you make, nearly universal changes, it's going to benefit some characters more than most. It's unavoidable. However, specifically, this benefits most of the types of characters that were already considered top tier in the previous versions of the game. Right now, Strive has a big problem of high health, heavyweight style characters being kind of the meta overall. Those characters benefit from damage being nerfed because they're already high health characters. They're just going to live even longer. Obviously, this benefits low health characters to some extent as well, but characters like Milia and Chip, they were kind of dying overboard. You were often killing them by significantly more than you needed to, whereas some characters like Johnny and Gold Lewis and whatnot, sometimes you were like barely killing them or barely not killing them, and those situations are just going to be worse now. So naturally, if that's the case, it's bound to happen. Like I said, you would want to change those characters accordingly. Unfortunately, I don't think that happened. If you look at the patch notes, there are some things in this that I think are truly baffling. So let's actually look at those real quick. Okay, so we're looking at the patch notes for this version of the game, and let's just look at one of the heavyweight characters that is generally considered very strong in this version of the game, and let's look how they changed. Let's take a look at Johnny, and he didn't change. This is basically a nothing patch note. They nerfed the damage on the Senga, and it's impactful, right? They're nerfing his damage a little bit, But this is a character that was already considered very, very strong last patch, generally top 4, top 5 to most high level players. And he's a high health character who benefits from nerfing the damage across most of the cast, right? And they didn't really do much to him. If we scroll up, we have Sin, another character considered top 3 pretty much universally last patch. Just a couple of damage nerfs. Pretty significant ones, especially like Time and Barrel. I don't know why Clean Hit did 149 damage before. Probably should have never done that, but they nerfed it. So that is significant, but he doesn't have any fundamental changes to how his kit works or anything. So he's still going to be top tier. Basically didn't move at all. Even if we scroll up to another problematic character like Gold Lewis, this is, in my opinion, the best character last version, in other people's opinion, the best character. And he did get changes. You know, these are significant. They nerfed Behemoth Typhoon damage scaling. They nerfed the security gauge cooldown, so that's a little bit significant, and they nerfed Skyfish. But these don't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things. He's still going to be top 3, top 5 minimum, right? This doesn't really change much about how he plays. Other characters, it's the same deal. Leo, he actually probably got buffed because they buffed the Oki on his flash kick and Swite. Nago, same thing. He basically didn't really get changed very much. In this case, these were already characters that were top tier before. They basically got no changes, or in some cases, positive changes. And the game around them is actually changing mostly beneficially for them because damage is going down across the board, so these characters are going to be less likely to die. So this is already really bad in my opinion because, yeah, sure, lowering damage is theoretically good, but he didn't even lower the damage like evenly across the cast, which is another thing that I think is kind of questionable. Like Nago, for example, did not get any damage reductions at all. Johnny only got a damage reduction on one move. It doesn't even affect most of his moveset, right? This change is kind of off the mark, even if it was well intended. Because you have a character like Ino, for example, her damage got way more significantly impacted than a character like Johnny, in my opinion. Ino versus Johnny is just worse for Ino this patch, when Ino is already not like a great character and Johnny was already top tier. So there's a lot of weird kind of missed mark type changes in this patch, in my opinion, in that regard. Real quick, I also want to mention a change to Guard Crush. So they basically reduced the overall chip damage on Guard Crush moves by 25%. So they're essentially doing half the damage that they did previously. So things like, you know, Behemoth Typhoon and Nago's normals, for example, they're just doing less damage now. I think this change is very overblown. Gold Lewis is not good because he does so much chip damage. It's kind of like icing on the cake. It's something that he doesn't need. And sure, it being nerfed does impact Gold Lewis more than most characters, but it's not going to dramatically change his placement on the tier list. Most of the time when you're fighting Gold Lewis, you want to be FDing the Behemoth Typhoons anyways, because otherwise it's going to be significantly harder to take your turn back. I don't think this change is that relevant. Obviously it matters, but it's not as impactful as I think most people would like to think. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is actually Testament's change, and not specifically that I have a complaint inherently about Testament becoming better as a character, but I want to talk about a common problem that Arxis kind of runs themselves into, and why this Testament change is actually contradictory towards what they were talking about, wanting characters that have strengths and weaknesses. So if we look at Testament, this is a character who in 3.7 I actually think was pretty good. They were like high mid-tier, and I thought they were pretty good, right? They were honestly in a good spot. I don't think you needed to change them much. They have been power crept in season 4 because they just made too many characters way too stupid in this version of the game, so they're kind of overshadowed. But I don't think that means that you should buff Testament. I think that means that other characters should go down. Other characters are too strong. What I mind is this change here. So for Grounded Grave Reaper, they removed the frontal hurt box. This directly goes against what Arxis was saying that they want to do, which is that they want characters to have defined weaknesses. And specifically, something I think Arxis has been really bad about over the course of Strive is removing key counterplay to a character. Testament, in my opinion, is supposed to have this problem. Their Fireball is supposed to have a weakness on startup, so more characters have a functioning way to disrupt their zoning. Now, I play Ram, right? Ram destroys his character. Ram doesn't have to care about what Testament does. This change doesn't even help Testament against Ram at all. Ram still can just far slash Grave Reaper, it doesn't matter. This is the type of change that's going to make some matchups so much harder for some characters in a way that I don't think is like healthy. I think it was good that characters could try to target this weakness on Testament. So this is just an example of them removing a key kind of counterplay to a character, when I think that's something that they shouldn't be doing. And in fact, they should be adding more counterplay to other characters. Arxis is really inconsistent about this in general, because if you look at last patch, they nerfed things like Axel's Rainwater and Milia's Capel. And specifically in this patch, they actually went back on some of those changes. So if we scroll up and we look at Milia, they actually buffed Capel to try to make up for how they nerfed it last patch. If we scroll up and look at Axel, they buffed Rainwater to try to make up for how they nerfed it last patch. These are moves that were actually really overtuned. Capel and Rainwater both were overtuned. I don't disagree with how they nerfed them previously. They shouldn't have nerfed the characters in the way that they did without giving them something to compensate for it. I like that those moves were not as overtuned before, but these types of changes just feel inconsistent amongst each other, because it's like you nerfed characters who were actually worse than Testament before, and now you're buffing Testament even though Testament was better than those characters were. There's no consistency in that type of decision making, in my opinion. And to further go along with this, we have Dizzy. Now, Dizzy is the newest character in the game, so I won't give them too much flack for this one, but Dizzy is another character where they actually nerfed her 236k, which is the fire spike. They made it to where it is a strike now, meaning that it is affected by pushback. So before, you know, you could just do block strings where you just did fire spike, fire spike, fire spike, and they were very, very hard to deal with. And I do agree that they actually should have been nerfed. They were too good. It was a stupid thing to have in the game. Dizzy is not good. This is one of, if not the worst character in the game currently. And while they did give her some compensation things that are pretty good, you know, they gave her the hard knockdown on fire spike, which is good, and it now clashes with projectiles, which is good. These things don't outweigh how stupid the block string was. So it's, again, they were nerfing something about a character who is already really bad, which theoretically could be fine, but you should have given the character more to compensate for it, in my opinion. The only reason I'll give this one a pass is because the character is so new. It would probably be difficult to actually tell what you should give the character in her current position. The next most egregious problem with this patch that I want to talk about is easily Potemkin. So Pot last patch in 4.0, there were a lot of complaints about him originally because they, of course, removed Kara's. Pot couldn't do, you know, Kara Potbuster, Kara Mega Fist, all of that stuff. They just removed it entirely. And in compensation, they gave him some very impactful buffs. I actually think that 4.0 was probably Potemkin's best version, probably the strongest he's ever been. But naturally, people were upset with how the character was changed because, you know, he was just less fun to them, which is fine. You know, I think that's reasonable. So in this emergency patch, they decided to give Potemkin his Karas back. And I don't inherently disagree with that. I actually think it was cool that they decided to kind of roll back that idea that he shouldn't have Karas because people wanted him to have Karas. They think it's fun. The problem here is that they did not actually change things about the character to compensate for the fact that he has his season 4 buffs on top of giving him Kara's back. So there's a lot of examples of this character doing very egregious things because he has his season 4 buffs and Kara's. So let me show you some examples real quick. With season 4, they of course increased the range on Potbuster because they removed the ability to Kara Potbuster. And on top of that, they also gave it armor to kind of make it, you know, extra strong in season 4. However, when it comes to this patch, they gave him Kara's back, but they didn't nerf anything about Potbuster besides the damage, so it still has the increased range and the armor, meaning that for one, Potbuster just reaches at round start with Kara Potbuster, which is insane that it goes that far. More importantly, because it's also armored now, this means that it beats almost every option at round start that isn't just walking back or jumping backwards. So I have Ram set to do 5k here. Hold on. And as you can see, the 5k just lost, even though it's a 7-frame move, right? As a 7-frame 5k with a great range, it just gets armored and gets pot-bustered for 40% of your health into Oki. This, to me, I don't understand how was that, like, allowed. Like, obviously, this is just one example of round start, but just in general, it means any type of situation, you have to worry about an armored command grab that reaches this far against this character. And yes, there is some counterplay. Obviously, you could jump or backdash at round start. And if you're doing a jump cancelable move like 5k, you can jump cancel it and make the pot buster with. But this just dramatically reduces the amount of things you can do against Potemkin at round start, or more specifically, just any situation at this spacing roughly. And I think that's kind of insane that they decided to do this instead of just nerfing the range on Potbuster to account for it having a Kara like it was before. Another change that Pot got in season 4 was that they made it to where Garuda was a projectile. So previously it was a strike, meaning that it had pushback on block, and specifically it was affected by FD. Now in season 4 is a projectile, so it's not affected by FD at all. It doesn't matter if you FD it or not. They did this because he couldn't Kara anymore, so they wanted to make sure that he could stay close even if the opponent was FDing. However, they did not change anything about Garuda in this patch to compensate for the fact that he can Kara Garuda again. So doing things like this, just Karaing Garuda over and over, there's no way to stop him from advancing forward anymore. The only way to beat Garuda is simply to jump over it and try to whip punish it. This to me was like one of the first things I figured that they would change about this mechanic. It just doesn't make sense that you wouldn't. Like you made it a projectile because you couldn't Kara it anymore. So naturally, if you're going to be able to Kara it, you would make it not a projectile anymore. Now it's just a projectile that you can Kara. So they removed a lot of the counterplay to the move. It's you either use deflect shield, you do a reversal, or you jump. And I feel like this gives Pot even better offense than he already had, and his offense was already very strong. So what this results in is they basically gave Pot all of the buffs that he had in Season 4, and then gave him Kara's back, and the only compensation was that they nerfed Flick's hurt box, which is like, okay, Flick was pretty stupid last patch, I'm glad you did that. And they reduced the damage on some things, which is like, okay, that's a universal thing, sure, right? Like I mentioned earlier, Pot's a high health character, he benefits from damage going down in the game, and you gave him some absurdly high value buffs in this version of the game, to the point where I don't even know how this was like allowed. I feel like anybody could look at some of these things and being like, oh yeah, we should probably nerf that again because we're giving him Kara's back, but they didn't do that. So in my opinion, Pot is pretty overtuned in this version of the game in ways that felt very avoidable, and almost feels like they either didn't have time, they rushed out the patch, which is possible, or they just didn't think about how consequential some of these things would be. The last character that I want to talk about with this version of the game is going to be Ram. Now, I already have another video coming out specifically about Ram, but that video will be out in a couple days, so you guys can just watch that if you want a full breakdown about what I think about Ram in this version. My problem with Ram is not that she was nerfed necessarily. I actually think she was nerfed in mostly pretty good ways, and she was a character definitely deserving of being nerfed because she was overtuned in Season 4. My problem with Ram is that she is the only character that was effectively nerfed in this version of the game. The only other character you could consider is Gold Lewis, who wasn't really that impactfully nerfed in my opinion. Whereas Ram, I think, is getting considerably worse in this version of the game. Again, as she should, but my problem is that it's really only her that changed. So if this version of the game was an attempt to try to fix some of the overpowered characters and give them properly defined weaknesses, then they completely failed on that. The only character that they actually changed in that regard is going to be Ram. I don't think they did it for anyone else. And I think Ram is actually an example of like, if they just did this for like all the other characters that are considered top tier right now, I'd be singing the praises about this patch. I would actually be over the moon about how good this patch was, and they, targeted all the characters that they should have, but that's not what happened. They targeted one character that was overpowered, they nerfed her, they made one other character probably that level of too good now, which is Potemkin in my opinion, and that's really all this patch accomplished, outside of the damage nerfs, which again are good, but inversely, kind of benefit the high health characters more than it should. So yeah, overall, while I think this patch is again kind of in the right direction, it's pretty much the same how I felt about base Season 4, where there's a lot of good ideas here, but it's not enough. You're not going in the direction far enough, and you're missing the mark completely in a lot of regards, in my opinion. Do I think this version of the game is probably better than Season 4? Probably. It probably is overall a net positive for most people. Do I think it is anywhere close to what I was hoping for? Or even anywhere close to what I thought that they were implying that they were going to do? Not really, to be honest. I think there was a lot more changes that they needed to make to several characters on the list, and these types of changes feel like they're just kind of releasing half of a patch, and releasing half of a patch is just going to have not the greatest effect on the meta of a game long term. It really feels like at this point Arxis has just kind of either lost track of what it is truly that they want to do with the game, they don't understand how to go about the things that they actually want to accomplish, or they just straight up don't have the time or resources to do the things that they want to do. And it's becoming more and more evident with how Season 4 feels pretty poorly handled, how there are a lot of bugs in the game especially, and now looking at this emergency patch, I thought was an example of them trying to right that wrong that they did, but it still feels like we got the same level of quality put into this patch as we did the previous one, in my opinion. So yeah, do I still like Strive? Obviously, I still like the game, I'm still playing it, I still enjoy it. I just kind of hope that somewhere down the line we can start getting higher quality patches. But of course, that's just my opinion on things. Again, I was pretty critical in this video because I think these types of things are important, but that's just my opinion. I would like to know what you guys think about everything going on right now with this version and patches in general. Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.